So in this class, we're going to go over some shading techniques in Flash, some techniques on how to put some shadow on your character. Flash is a little bit limited in regards to control over brushes, gradients, and transparencies compared to photo editing software such as Photoshop or even GIMP, where you have complete control. But I'll just show you what you can do in Flash. Other options are creating all this artwork in Photoshop, all of your body parts, and then exporting it from Photoshop as JPEGs or any kind of image file, and then bringing them into Flash and creating symbols out of those images. So the first thing we're going to go over is just the shadows, the options that you have to create shadows for your character and why you want to do that. I'll just show you one of our rigs on the site. Okay, so here's Winston, and you can see he has this drop shadow underneath him. I'm just going to go in for a second. Now if we turn the shadow off, you can see the value that the shadow adds where it really plants him on the ground. If we turn the shadow off, he kind of feels like he's just floating in this white space. So when you do have a shadow, it just makes the character feel like they're grounded. For 2D animation, I prefer using a shadow puddle like this, just because the other option that I'm going to show you is a more realistic shadow. But for 2D animation, it's obviously not realistic. It's very much a cartoon style of animation, and I'd rather go with an unrealistic shadow, I should say. So let's just go over how to create one of these, and I'll show you what the other options are. Alright, so let's just hide our reference for a minute. So the first thing you'd want to do is create a new layer, or we're going to go inside the character, and you want to put the shadow inside the character's master comp, or master symbol. We'll double click to get inside, where all of his body part layers are, and we'll put the shadow right at the bottom, because we want the shadow to be completely behind him. So we'll create a new layer at the bottom here, just drag it to the bottom, and we'll just rename it shadow. Alright, so once we have our shadow layer, let's select the oval tool, and let's just make a perfect circle. So we're going to hold shift down and just drag out a circle, and you can see that it has this gray color because we have the fill color is gray. We have this outer line, so what we can do is select the outer line. We don't need the line for the shadow. We're just going to use the paint. Select the paint for the circle, go to the color swatch or the color window, and if you don't have it here in your shortcut toolbar, you can go to window and just make sure you check color here. It might come up as a separate window, and that's fine. So it'll look like this. Change it to black, and then underneath this where it says solid color, it should say solid color here, and there's a drop down window. Just hit the arrow and change this to radial gradient. Down here we have this color bar, and one side's black and one side's white. What that'll give us is a radial gradient from the center going outwards. So we have black in the center, changes to white. So just so we don't confuse transparency for white, let's change the stage color. I'm just going to click on the stage and go to this color swatch here in the properties, and I'm just going to change the stage color to a light blue. So I'm just going to select this circle again, and let's go to our color window. You can see we have these little tabs here that you can drag. I want to change the white tab to be transparent, and the way you do that is right here in this list of values. You can see we have RGB, red, green, blue, and then at the bottom here there's an A. It stands for alpha. So that's going to control our transparency, and you can see the numbers at 100%, so it's completely solid. We want to change that to 0. So you can click on it and change it to 0. And you can see that our color bar here is, we see a grid now, so that indicates transparency. And you can see that it goes from completely transparent all the way to black. So we'll just hit enter on the keyboard. It degrades to transparent. Select our circle here, hit Q on the keyboard, and let's just scale it down. And maybe make it a little bit bigger. And if we click off, you can see we have this nice shadow here. So let's select it now, and we'll just make a symbol out of it. Press F8 on the keyboard, and we'll just name that shadow. So now that it's a symbol, we can go to under the properties. If we go to under color effect, where it says style, we can drop that window down, and let's select alpha to change transparency as well. So you can see now we have this alpha slider. I don't want that to be totally black in the middle like that, so I'm just going to slide it down a little bit, maybe to around 75% or so. Let's change the stage back to white. Now we know that's transparent and not white, so we'll change the stage back to white just so we can see how it looks, and I think that's looking pretty good. And the only reason why I changed this to alpha is just to tone down that really black area. So we'll just drag this over behind the character. I think we need to scale that up a little bit. And that gives us a nice little shadow puddle underneath our character. So that's the type of shadow I would use for 2D style of animation. Alright, so let's have a look at the other way you can create a shadow by just using a drop shadow, and we're going to change our symbol to a movie clip symbol. So I'm just going to double click to get back out, so we're on scene 1, right where the master symbol is. So to create the drop shadow, we have to do it out here, and we're going to put it on a layer right underneath our character's master symbol layer. So we'll just create a new layer, and we have to move it underneath the character's master symbol layer, and we'll just rename that drop shadow. Alright, so what we're going to do here is we're going to copy our character's symbol, our master symbol, onto this new drop shadow layer. So just have the master symbol selected and right click over it and choose copy. And then select your drop shadow layer and we'll right click in space here and choose paste in place. So it's going to paste it right over top of the other one. So we have two here now. So with your drop shadow layer selected, you press Q on your keyboard for your free transform tool. We want to scale it down, but we don't want it to scale this way from the bottom up. So we can hold Alt down just to constrain the anchor to the bottom of the symbol. You can hold Alt down, or you can move the pivot point down to the bottom like we did with the other body parts. But an easy way to do that is just to hold Alt down if we don't want the pivot point to change permanently. Skew it and scale it. We're going to turn this copy into the shadow, so you don't want the shadow to be underneath his feet like that, so we're just going to use my arrow keys just to move it up a little bit. So for this symbol that we're going to use as the drop shadow, we're going to change the type of symbol that it is. So if you look in your properties, you can see it's on graphic. We're going to change this one to movie clip. So select movie clip. Once you do that, your options change. And one of the options that we're going to need is down near the bottom. It's called filters. And we're just going to add a new filter. And we're going to choose drop shadow. And as soon as you do that, you can see there's a drop shadow that's been created behind the character. We don't want to see the character, we just want to see the shadow. So in the properties, we're just going to check hide object. And as soon as you do that, you can see that the character disappeared and we now just see the shadow. And then there's some other options here that you can change. One I would mess around with is distance. If you hover over the number and you just left click and drag back and forth, you can see you can change where the shadow's positioned. So you may want to move it up a little bit. The other one is strength. You can see it's at 100%. So just left click over that and drag. And you can change the opacity of it or how strong it is. So something like that might be good. And you can blur it a little bit if you like as well. So you stylize that however you like. Alright, so the difference with this shadow as opposed to the other one is it's out here in the scene 1 area. So if you move the character around from left to right or right to left, you have to animate the symbol with him so it stays with him. I'll just go inside here for a moment and I'll just move the arm a little bit and you'll see the shadow moving with him. So you can see the shadow moves with him. When you do the animation inside Flash, you won't actually see the shadow updating with the character, but when you render the animation it will move with the character. To demonstrate that, I'll just zip through and do some quick animation here. So you can see the shadow moving with him, but you don't see the arm flapping. And if we look inside, it's the same thing. You see his arm flapping, but the shadow doesn't animate. Alright, so let's just do a test movie, and you can see the arm and the shadow is also moving. Say we have a character that's a little bit more on the realistic side, then I may go with a shadow like this. Just seems to be more appropriate. Alright, so let's put some color on our character. So far we've just filled him in with this shade of gray. We'll go with like a blue color maybe. Let's put it on his body first. And we'll use the fill tool. And then inside his belly you can be a little bit lighter. Alright, so we'll go with something like this for now. We can always change it later. So for the rest of them I'm going to use this blue color, so I'll just eyedrop that, the eyedropper tool, and I'll just go through and fill in everything now. Alright, so in this area here we want this light color to continue up through his neck. So if we just fill it, the paint's going to go all the way through the shape. I'm just going to temporarily block this in with the line tool. Go to his inside of his torso and I just eyedrop this light blue color that we created. And then I'll use my selection tool to double click and get back out and back in the neck. And we'll just fill that in and we can get rid of this line now. Alright, so let's double click to get out. I'm just going inside each symbol and just coloring everything. With the hands we have to do all of them. You can use your greater than less than keys next to the M on your keyboard just a step from one frame to the next. I'm just going to go through and quickly fill all these. Alright, so we have them all colored in. Now I want to add a little bit of depth. Now you don't have to do this. Oftentimes they'll leave the character just a flat color. You might have a couple of different shades of the color in there. Sometimes if characters have hair, they'll have a couple of different shades of brown or blonde, or whatever the hair color is. Because our character is built with different pieces, we're going to add a little bit of shadow to the sides of the pieces, but you want to make sure that we don't add shadow right to the end because you'll see it cut off. Alright, so I just want to add a little sliver of a darker shade of blue here, just to give him some depth. So we'll assume the light source is coming from somewhere above. So if we go into his mouth, so I want to have a bit of a shadow underneath here, underneath his mouth. So I'm just going to use the line tool, and I'm going to change the thickness to 1, just so it's not so thick. I'm just going to quickly block in an area of shadow. And we'll just quickly smooth that out. We'll just eyedrop the color that we already have in there. Go to my color swatch, and we're just going to make it a little bit darker. So I'm going to click on here, go to your hue, and we'll just make it a little bit darker. We'll just drag this down a little bit toward the black, make it a little darker. And that should be good, and we'll fill that in, and then we'll get rid of the line. Normally I would go through and do all the mouths, but just for demonstration reasons I'll just leave that as it is for now. So because we're assuming the light source is coming from the top somewhere, we're going to shade the neck a little bit as well. So let's double click and get inside the neck. And we're going to use that same color. It's already in our color swatch, so we'll just keep that there. And I'm just going to draw a line across here, our fill tool. And we'll just shade that in, and we'll delete the line. Just gives us a little bit of shadow under his neck. And if we double click to come back out and take a look at it, okay, you can't really see it very well. I just want to make sure we can see it under the arm, but it doesn't come around the arm this way. So just maybe under the pit a little bit. So we'll get back in there. Bring it out a little bit more so it's more significant. And something like that is nice. These are just real subtle shadows. So when we get to the arm area, it gets a little bit trickier. We don't want to have the shadow cut off here. I'll just show you, for example, what you want to stay away from. So if I do it like that, and it just sort of cuts off at the arm, we can see that it just sort of stops and ends there. And if you try to continue it with the other arm, you'll see that the shadow will break when you rotate the arm. So what we want to do is have the shadows just sort of tip off at the end. Something like that. And then that way we don't have to worry about it breaking at the joints. So let's just test this and make sure it's looking okay. So we try to pose the character a little bit. I think that'll work out just fine. Alright, so I'll just run through and finish off the legs and feet. Okay, so I just did the upper leg, and you can see how it sort of cuts off here. And again, it's the same effect that we had with the shoulder. You can see the light color overlapping the dark color, and it actually works. It actually helps to make the shoulder look like it's got depth, and I think the same thing is working here. Just having the leg shadow being cut off by the light color in the torso actually helps the torso look like it's bulging out here. So let's just exaggerate that a little bit more. We'll do the lower leg. So I don't think that's a very desirable effect, having it just cut off like that at the top of the lower leg. So when you bend it, it looks okay. But what I would do is just pinch this a little bit. If you run into areas like that, just make it real subtle and just sort of have it taper off at the end. Better to have it less noticeable than more noticeable in a negative way. And I think it would be nice to add a little bit of shadow under here, just to show some depth in the toe. Alright, so I'll just run through the other side of the body. So you always want to go through as you're working on these shadows, go through and test them and see how they look when you bend the joints. Alright, so I think that color looks a little odd. So actually what we can do is, let's eyedrop the color of his belly, and then we'll go with just a darker shade of that color. Let's go into the color settings, and we'll use our hue and just go down a little bit darker than what it already is. And let's fill that, maybe a little bit darker than that. And that should be good, just as long as it's noticeable and adds value. Okay, I think that's good. I think that that adds a little bit of Z depth to our two-dimensional character, but it's just another design option that you may wish to consider.